Current mission, talk about international economics as it relates to the Constitution. So again, what's in the Constitution? We've talked about some of these things in some senses. Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. Duties and imposts are taxes on imports, what we would generically refer to as tariffs these days. Then it says, this is Article 1, Section 9, right? Which is, we should know by now, Article 1, Section 9 is the powers of Congress, the things that Congress has the power over. So then it says Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, and among the several states, and with the Indian tribes, which were sort of foreign nations within the United States. Again, coin money regulated the value of others, and a foreign coin. So Congress clearly has the power to regulate the value of the U.S. dollar relative to other foreign currencies. Regulate the value of our dollar compared to foreign currencies. And then it says no tax or duty should be laid on articles exported from any state, so it prevents Congress from passing taxes on exports. Section 10 is what states cannot do. So states cannot create treaties, alliances, or confederations. A state of California cannot negotiate a treaty with Japan. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any imposts or duties, so that no state, unless Congress approves it, can put into place a tariff. And we talked about this before. If they do, if the state does for some reason put on a tariff, then the federal government gets the money anyhow. And then no state shall blah, 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 enter with the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops in a state of war, enter in an agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power. So again, states cannot create treaties or agreements or compacts with other countries. The President, Article 2, Section 2, is the power of the President. He shall have the power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur, and he shall nominate, advice and consent, shall appoint ambassadors. So the people who represent us in other countries are appointed by the President. Again, the Senate has to approve and confirm. We can make a treaty, but that requires 2/3 of the Senate. So for the President to make a treaty, our President is trying to make treaties with a bunch of different countries right now. Those require 2/3 majority of the senators, which means it's going to take a bunch of Democrats to agree to those treaties to get them through the Senate. 2/3, supermajority. So how sure are we of the validity of our trade data? We watched a little video about the data, had some things about how we do that. I just want to very quickly show you some balance of trade numbers, not overall, but for different countries. So if we look at the European Union as a whole, current account minus $6 billion. So we had a trade deficit last year of only $6 billion with Europe. That number, the current account number, is reasonably accurate, not completely accurate, but most of the time, if there's a car getting off a boat or a car getting on a boat or a bunch of steel or something, we know about that. Some of the things in the current accounts, those payments, especially secondary income payments, we don't know about, so that figure might be a little bit off, a few $1 billion here and there, and who cares, it's only a few $1 billion. Capital financial account plus 81, so statistical discrepancy of $375 billion. That number is off somewhere in there. There's an error of $375 billion. That's not really good, yes? So here's some other countries. Germany, we had a minus $72 billion with them, with only a $2 billion, so we kind of know what happens with Germany. UK, $46 billion with a $12 billion error. Canada, $12 billion trade surplus, but we had a $67 billion statistical discrepancy. Mexico, we had a minus 82, but a $99 billion statistical discrepancy. And again, with Mexico, for example, we have factories that are just on the other side of the border. A truck drives across in the morning with a bunch of stuff, unloads that stuff, it gets worked on during the day, put back on the truck, and driven across back at night. The stuff that goes out from Mexico into the U.S. or Mexico is worth more than the stuff that left in the morning, but it's the same stuff going back and forth over the course of the day. Probably that trade number doesn't make a lot of sense, just because there's all these goods that are just, the parts are going into a factory during the morning and they're coming back out assembled into something at night, and yet that creates a minus in our trade balance from that truck driving back and forth. So that Mexican number in particular is a little funky. Australia, we had a plus 37, but a $42 billion. Right? China, we had a $332 billion trade deficit, but the statistical discrepancy was $592 billion. India, Japan, Korea, we have trade deficits with them, but we also have these very large statistical discrepancies that mean that we're having trouble figuring out what's really going on between us and them. Okay? So a little history now, a little detail of how the world works, going back into time. If two countries traded back in the 1200s or 1300s or 1400s or 1500s, it was most likely that they traded stuff for stuff. The original trade pattern between Europe and India wasn't that the Europeans brought a bunch of gold to India and bought stuff, or Malaysia to buy spices or whatever. They would bring ships full of stuff that was manufactured in England that didn't exist in India or Malaysia or the Indies, as they called them. And then the captain would be swapping stuff. They would trade the goods that they brought from England and come back with spices, but it wouldn't usually be a money for money exchange. And even in the modern world, we used to send ships full of Pepsi to Russia, and they would send back ships full of vodka. In the old days, particularly though, trade was mostly accomplished by actual just trading of stuff for stuff. Sometimes, however, if we didn't do the stuff for stuff trade, or if it's like England and France, where they're right across the channel from each other, they probably or they might have paid for that trade in gold or silver. Remember that gold or silver is money back then? So you could pay for your trade in gold or silver. The problem with that is that gold and silver is also money in your country, right? Remember that all these European countries, for example, are using Spanish silver dollars as their money. That money is taken as valid all across Europe. So you're England, you're buying a bunch of stuff from France, money is flowing out of your country, there is now less money in your country. So you have a trade deficit. You're England, you've been selling all this stuff to France, you have a trade deficit. That trade deficit gets balanced by gold or silver flowing out of your country. That means you have less money in your country. That means consumers in your country are going to have less money to spend. Businesses are going to react to that by lowering prices. So let's think this through again. Gold moves from England to France. The money supply in England has gone down. The money supply in France has gone up. That means prices are going to go down in England, the quantity theory of money. Prices are going to go down in England and prices are going to go up in France. Now I'm a British consumer. Prices of domestic goods are going down. Prices of those French goods are going up. All of a sudden, I'm less likely to buy from France and more likely to buy here at home from England. trade deficits would naturally fix themselves in the old days because money would move from country to country, prices would change as money moves, and that would balance out the system. So again, there's this Adam Smithy idea of a natural outcome in which things balance themselves out naturally over time. In this case, money changes, prices change, it balances the system. We get to World War I, and the world's going to change. So World War I ends with 5 treaties, but the treaty we care about is the Treaty of Versailles because it's us and England and France and Germany and all them in this Treaty of Versailles, which was signed at the Palace of Versailles, Louis XIV's palace, in a particular railroad car. Everybody did things on trains back then, right? And so there's this railroad car, very fancy railroad car, and that's where the Treaty of Versailles is signed. Anyway, the Germans, we don't actually invade Germany in World War I. The Germans surrender before that invasion has to happen, and the reason they surrender is that Woodrow Wilson put forth this surrender plan, these 14 points, that treated Germany really nicely and just kind of tried to reintegrate everybody and create peace in the world. So the Germans surrender, they turn in their weapons, they get ready to go home. The German delegation shows up at Versailles outside of Paris, and basically the French and the British go, we were fooling, and we're really not going to follow these 14 points, and we're going to be really mean to you. One of the British delegates to the conference is this guy named John Maynard Keynes. If you take Econ 103, which you will someday, become an econ major, come take Econ 103, you'll talk about him a lot. He quits. He's a representative of the British government. He's there to advise the British government, and when they abandon the 14 points and decide that they're going to do something mean and nasty, Keynes quits and goes home. And he writes a book called The Economic Consequences of the Peace. And basically in this book, he lays out the situation of all the countries in Europe, shows that if they work together, they could rebuild really quickly and everybody could be better off. But if they isolate Germany and fight, what he predicts is that the economies of Europe really aren't going to recover from the war very well, that Germany is going to have huge economic problems, that evil people are going to come to power in Germany, and basically we're going to have to fight this war over again. He's not the only one. The head of the French army, if you know your history, the head of the French army says that basically this is just a ceasefire, and 20 years or so from now the war is going to start again. So the 1920s economies in the world are not very good. The 1930s, obviously, we have the Great Depression. Everything that Keynes says was going to happen comes to pass. We're going to fight another war. Part of this, all the countries in the world basically go off of gold, so this idea that gold would move between countries to balance things off is gone. But on the other hand, because of the war, World War I, world trade collapses in World War I. It doesn't necessarily rebuild that well during the 20s and during the Great Depression. And so this is all not a huge issue, but we're going to fight World War II. And then coming out of World War II, we're going to want to fix things so things are better. We're not going to want to make the same mistakes again. So it's 1944. By 1944, we know who's going to win World War II. Barring something really bizarre happening, the United States is pushing Japan back in the Pacific, and that war's over. It's just a lot of people are going to die still, but that war's done. In Europe, the Allies are invade Europe, and they're pushing up through Italy, and then they're going to come in through Normandy, and it's just a matter of time. It's a matter of time and lives and money, but it's just a matter of time. So the countries that are going to win all get together in a little town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. and they create an agreement which we call the Bretton Woods Agreement, strangely. The head of the American delegation to this conference, and one of the two people who set it up, is this man named Harry Dexter White. He's the number 2 person in the Treasury Department. He's also a Russian spy. He's concluded that capitalism is going to lose and communism is going to win, and so secretly he's helping the communists win. He's a spy. He's a Russian spy, but he's negotiating for the United States. John Maynard Keynes is the leader of the British delegation. Keynes has a plan. Keynes' plan is that we go to a system of fixed exchange rates, and again, from the first video, you should know what that means, that we're going to set exchange rates. But in his world, we're going to tie everything and build everything around the British pound. So the British pound is going to be the central currency of the world. Everything's going to be fixed in relation to that. And then he wants to create a bank for the world. And he wants to create a development fund, a place that countries can go to help them rebuild and redevelop. Harry Dexter White wants the United States to kind of take over the dominance of the world. And so, again, perhaps in a corollary, and you should keep this in the back of your mind, Britain had to borrow all the money to fight World War I and World War II from us. So they are deeply, deeply, deeply in debt to the United States in a way that they cannot pay back right away. What that means is that every time Keynes puts forth his proposal, Harry Dexter White says, okay, I'm fine with it, but you guys got to pay your loans back right now. Well, they can't pay their loans back right now. So Harry Dexter White keeps saying the dollar is going to be the central currency. We're going to build this around the dollar. When Keynes says, no, the pound, Dexter White says, hey, fine with that, pay your loans back. They don't have the money. The United States can dictate the terms here because everybody owes us a lot of money. And we can dictate the terms of the Bretton Woods Agreement because they owe us money. We currently owe China trillions of dollars. And there are people who see parallels between the British-U.S. relationship at the end of World War II and the evolving U.S.-China relationship, just reversed. So what's going to happen is that the dollar is going to be tied to gold, and every other exchange rate in the world is going to be tied to the dollar. So every country in the world except the United States gets to set its own exchange rate. The United States has to let everybody else set it. And we did that on purpose, right? The United States took the view that its job was to help the rest of the world rebuild, that we're the good guys, that we're the helpful people, that our job is to make the world a better place. Okay? So we are going to be Atlas, and the world is going to sit on our shoulders. Everybody is going to be able to fix their exchange rate to us, and we have to take whatever everybody else sets. Then they set up a bank, but they call it the International Monetary Fund. And I always think that Dexter White did this just to make Keynes mad. That there is a bank for the entire world. It still exists. Its headquarters is in Washington, D.C. The International Monetary Fund, it's a bank. And then we have this thing called the World Bank, which is a development fund. Its job is, let's go back to the International Monetary Fund for a second, and we'll be back to them before too long. The IMF, if your country's in financial trouble, you go to the IMF. If your country wants to build a bridge and doesn't have the money to build the bridge or needs to build a new port or something like that, you can go to the World Bank. So the International Monetary Fund makes loans like $5 billion. The World Bank makes loans like $20 million for completely different purposes. They're both in Washington, D.C. They're right across the street from each other. They hate each other's guts. Okay? And that's the world up through, as we come out of World War II, what the world's going to look like.